international politics. I'm Edward Lawrence, and today we are very grateful to be joined by a very special guest, the Polish ambassador to the United Kingdom, Witold Sobków.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for joining us here today. We're also joined by a student panel. We've got Rowan Landis, a BA Politics and Media student. We've also got Daniel Weissman, a BA Politics and Media student. We've got Holly Wong, a BA Multimedia Journalism student and also editor of the Bournemouth Rock student newspaper. And we're also joined by Dr. Kevin Maloney, a senior research fellow here at the Media School at Bournemouth University. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us. Thank you to the panel as well. Well, I think Rowan had the first question.
Okay. So just kind of a little bit of background about, how you got to the position you're in now. So how did you get here, really?
In Poland, we have a very similar system to the British one, the civil service. Okay. So we cannot be members of any political party. We have to take examinations, and there are open competitions. And then if you pass all the examinations, you can become a civil servant. So I started just as probably lots of British diplomats did, as a desk officer. I was responsible for Italy and Malta, just two countries. Then I also got Spain and Portugal and other countries, and then I became head of section, etc. So I climbed the ladder all the time. So I started my work in '91 after the changes in Poland. Before the changes, I didn't want it so much to work for the ministry. I worked at university, so I love universities. I was a lecturer at university. So we are civil servants, and we try to serve the interests of our countries, not representing any political party. We do not change when governments change, etc. And we are appointed by the President of the Republic of Poland, since we do not have monarchies anymore. We used to have, but not now.
So there must be some pretty cool perks to the job of being ambassador.
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages, absolutely. And I mean, you meet a lot of interesting people, definitely. You learn a lot all the time, so this is continuous learning. A disadvantage would be perhaps for families, because we have to move from one place to another. So for children it may be difficult. Different systems of education, they leave their friends. I'm in Europe now, and I was in Dublin, so it was not so far from here, but I could be posted to Japan or to Brazil, to any other place, so my children perhaps would not be very happy to leave the country that they love and their friends they love. So there are also some disadvantages. It's not so, and it's work for 16 hours a day, more or less. And 24 hours a day. We have our Blackberries now. We live in a world that we are connected all the time. So we use our iPods and Blackberries and iPhones, and we are on Facebook, on Twitter. We have our web pages. We have blogs, etc. Thank you.
Good. Dan, I think you wanted to talk about the European Union.
Yes,
in the context
in your guest lecture this morning, you talked about Poland eventually becoming has to become a member of the Eurozone, yes. And you said there would be 5 to 10 years until that might happen, or until this is supposed to happen. What factors are those that depend on when the time frame?
We need to take into consideration a lot of factors, and as I have said, we have a derogation. We do not have an opt-out. So first of all, it's written in the accession treaty that we have to join, but it's not written when. So first of all, it will depend on the so-called Maastricht criteria. We must fulfill the criteria. And then it depends also on the Eurozone. We want to see how the integration of the Eurozone proceeds, and we want to think twice before we make this decision. But we have also domestic considerations. First of all, we have to change our constitution. At the moment, it's written that the currency in Poland is the Polish zloty. So we need a huge majority in our parliament to change the constitution. And then we may have a referendum. And at the moment, a lot of people are against the euro in Poland. They are pro-European, pro-EU, but they would be against the euro. So, and since we could survive without any major economic crisis, people think that we are fine now, so why should we have the single currency? But we think that we will join because it's also about political integration. We could influence EU policies much better being a member of the Eurozone than being outside the zone. So when the conditions are right, the rate of exchange is right, we will have to join.
Yeah, and follow up on this. You just said you have different wages in the European Union. The European Union was originally built that all the members are equal. But do you think there is a certain type of inequality between the Eurozone members and the other EU members who are not in the Eurozone?
I think it is disappearing now. One of such political signs was the appointment of Donald Tusk as the President of the European Council. For the first time, we have someone from the so-called new countries, we avoid this term, as the head of the European Council. Which meant symbolically the end of those divisions between old members and new members. But of course, when you look at the economic situations, the differences are huge, still huge when it comes to wages. You mentioned wages. It's perhaps half of the wages in Poland in comparison with the wages here. So a lot of Poles have settled down in Britain. This was one of the reasons, of course, not the only one, that they chose Britain, but those differences still exist. And when it comes to the Eurozone and countries outside the Eurozone, we think that the integration will proceed much quicker in the Eurozone. Also political integration. And that is why we want to be a part of this in the future, because the most important decisions will be made in the Eurozone. So that is why we want to influence them.
You mentioned earlier that in your guest lecture that you held here, that being in the EU is like a marriage of convenience.
In comparison with NATO.
In comparison with NATO.
Like a love affair.
Like a love affair. Tell me more about what makes you come to those sort of, to say that.
NATO was about security. And we are also a pro-American country, so because of Poland's position, because of our history, we thought that security was one of the most important things that we wanted to achieve. So there was almost a national consensus regarding NATO. We didn't have a referendum, we didn't have it. The EU is different because you have sectoral interests. You negotiate environment, agriculture, trade, competitiveness, culture, etc. So this is much more complicated. It takes a lot of years. We had to do it properly. So it took really much time before we could achieve what we wanted to achieve. But it's also about security to some extent. It's extra security for us, even if NATO is the cornerstone of our defense. So the EU membership, we have just celebrated 10 years of our EU membership and 15 years of our NATO membership. We think this is a huge success, and a lot of people who are against our joining the EU are now pro-EU because they could see that this is working. Of course, we have a lot of structural funds, cohesion funds. It's a slightly different situation from the UK, for example. Our agriculture is huge, so we have also it's also beneficial for us to be a member of the common agriculture policy, etc. So we are still using the funds to modernize Poland, to develop. This is a huge injection of funds, but also it's a kind of symbolic return to being normal, to the situation before the Second World War.
So would you say that Poland sort of shifted slightly from east to west with
yes,
regards to Europe and NATO?
Oh yes, we have always regarded ourselves as a Western country, but after the war, because of history and the Yalta arrangements, etc., we had to be a satellite country, but we have never accepted it. That is why the Solidarity movement was born in Poland with Lech Wałęsa and Gdańsk, and it led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. So we have always believed in democracy and freedom.
Is there any other questions that any of the panel would like to? Holly?
Just shifting to the Ukraine crisis slightly, how will Poland establish a voice that doesn't antagonise your allies but also ensures some aspect of peace in the nation?
We are a part of international efforts, so we are not doing anything individually at the moment. We are a part of the European Union. We would like to see consensus on this, and we cooperate with other members of the European Union, like the Normandy format, so-called Normandy format with France and Germany, or with the USA, or in NATO, or in the OSCE, in other organizations, or in the UN. We think that only united international efforts could lead to peace. But of course, we believe in a diplomatic solution, a peaceful solution, not the military one, if there can be any. I mean, civilians cannot die in this conflict, so we want to stop it as soon as possible, abide by the rules, respect the international law, and find an acceptable solution to the conflict. Of course, we support the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's a sovereign country; it can make its own choices. But we are not an enemy of Russia. This is a huge strategic neighbor of Poland and also of other countries. So we want to find a suitable solution, preferably a diplomatic one.
Are European sanctions enough? I mean, we've seen also the peace deal in Minsk, yet another peace deal, but in some areas it's still apparent that there's still fighting going on. If we look around Debaltseve, the Ukrainian troops have pulled out and it's gone to the pro-Russians. And then we look at Kharkiv. Yesterday there was a bomb blast at a peaceful march, and also around that area the Ukrainians have abandoned many of their border checkpoints for fear of invasion, they put it, from the build-up of Russian troops. Are sanctions enough?
Our strength is in unity, I think, and if not sanctions, what can we have? Provide arms, then we have an open military conflict in the middle of Europe, or perhaps even a global conflict.
America wants to possibly arm Ukraine. There's been debates.
They haven't done it yet, and we are still counting on goodwill and rational solutions. So we think that sanctions are working. They have been working to some extent, and they are hurting at the moment. And this is our strength. We have ideas regarding other sanctions, perhaps in future. But we hope that the position of Russia will be such that we are not going to use those sanctions. That we can have a proper ceasefire, stop the fighting, withdraw the heavy arms on both sides and tanks, and stop the suffering of people that we have. So we are not going, we're not pushing to use any kind of measures like sending tanks or the military. And it's the same the role of NATO. I mean, NATO has a very limited role in this conflict. We can train the Ukrainian army, but not militarily. Civilian control of the army, building the institutions, things of this kind. We can provide non-lethal equipment like tents, blankets, things of this kind, but not the arms. So we are not doing this. We hope for a diplomatic solution of the conflict.
Let's just bring Dr. Kevin Maloney into play here. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, indeed, and thanks for your insights this morning.
Thank you.
Let's look to the future. When you come back in 20 years, do you think Ukraine and Russia will be members of the EU?
Well, that's a difficult question. I hope so. I would hope so, but I don't know if this is realistic, because if we look at Turkey, for example, it has taken us so much time to start negotiations, proper negotiations. But there are different ways of being nearer the European Union, like free trade agreements, like association agreements. This is what Ukraine did, and perhaps Russia will do the same in future. This is about approximation of standards, about certain not so much harmonization, but if we share the same values, we can improve our trade and investment and institutions and human rights and or the freedoms of expression of the media, etc. So we can do a lot together without proper membership at the beginning. But if a country, these are sovereign countries, if they make a decision they want to join, if they fulfill all the criteria, we are open to admit any country that fulfills all the criteria. But we have very clear criteria, the so-called Copenhagen criteria and other criteria, and then there are negotiations and the ratification. In some cases it may take a long time, or maybe some countries will never become members of the EU. But we have countries that are very close to the European Union, from the Western Balkans, for example. Also in Eastern Europe, Moldova is very advanced in what, let's say, in this rapprochement with the European Union. Georgia is looking at the European Union. So who knows what's going to happen in future, but it's not going to happen overnight or in the next 2 or 3 years.
No, true.
But yeah, it's possible.
Many of us hope that Poland could be an agent for bringing Western Europe closer to Russia. Do you see yourself in that sort of negotiating middle, good broker, honest broker role?
Yes, definitely. So this is what we did in the past with the Eastern Partnership, with Ukraine, with Georgia, with Moldova. We tried to do this with Armenia, Azerbaijan, or Belarus. We tried to convince those countries that this is, it's not just about membership. It was like in our history. We had to reform our agriculture after '89. So it was not just the membership of the European Union that we wanted to join and join the common agriculture policy. It was necessary. We wouldn't be able to survive, to face the competition. So those countries can be helped by providing them the right advice, expertise. This is what the British did in Poland, the Know-How Fund, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, twinning arrangements. We had not just the cities, but I mean civil servants from British ministries that worked in Polish ministries, providing us with advice. This is what we do in Ukraine, in countries of this kind. It's not just Britain. We had some help and advice from the Netherlands, for example. We called it the Utrecht formula. They helped us a lot. We met regularly, exchanging views during the negotiations, but even now, providing advice, raising standards, making our societies more democratic and our institutions stronger. This is the role of the European Union. This is what we can do. Poland can help. We have now our own know-how fund. I think the British Foundation for Democracy is not in Poland anymore, but we have our Polish institutions of this kind, helping Ukrainian institutions, Georgian institutions, the countries in the East, but not only in the East, also in Egypt and Tunisia and other places, sharing our knowledge and expertise from the times of transition, not easy times after '89.
Surely, it could sort of be argued, we've seen with Ukraine a government that's turned more sort of Western leaning. They've turned down an agreement with Moscow and they've moved towards the European Union. And then Mr. Putin has been accused of sort of meddling with the conflict in eastern Ukraine. We've seen the annexation of Crimea. Surely, doesn't that send signals that Mr. Putin views both NATO and the European Union as enemies, as offensive combatants?
I hope not. You see, and I hear statements of this kind that Russia was humiliated, and this is a reaction to this kind of humiliation of Russia. I do not agree with this. How can we say that Russia was humiliated? Russia became a member of the G7, G8. We had NATO-Russia Council. We offered them cooperation. When we created the Eastern Partnership, we went to Moscow. We said, do you want to join? This is not against you. And they said, no, we are not interested. We are a strategic partner of the European Union. We are not interested in any Eastern Partnership. So, you know, they were offered those opportunities, and they had cooperation, very close cooperation with NATO, the EU, the most developed countries of the G8, etc. So I just cannot say that Russia was humiliated. Of course, we had the disintegration of the Soviet Union, but this was not, I mean, because of us. This was a sovereign decision of politicians at the time. I mean, for us, Gorbachev was important in the changes with the perestroika. What happened in Poland was a combination of factors. John Paul II was one of them, the Polish Pope, as we say, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, of course, the reunification of Germany, but also people like Gorbachev and the perestroika. But this was the internal affair of the Soviet Union. They made decisions. And we are very happy that we could recreate our own sovereignty, that the Soviet troops were withdrawn from Poland, from East Germany, from other places. And that is why we could create this new Poland. And we are enjoying an economic success now. But you must take into consideration that in '89, the GDP of Poland and the GDP of Ukraine were identical. And our GDP now is 3 times more. Of course, it's difficult to compare those two countries because Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. We were a kind of satellite country, so we had more freedom, of course. But we also showed that we didn't waste time, that we introduced very difficult reforms, the so-called shock therapy. Leszek Balcerowicz and people of this kind. Our unemployment went up to 45%. We closed down inefficient coal mines, factories, the shipbuilding, steel plants, etc. It was socially painful. 2 million people had to emigrate, etc. But thanks to this, that we did it properly, our stock exchange is booming, we are enjoying a very good economic situation at the moment. So my advice would be do it properly, implement reforms. It's not just about the war in Ukraine, but it's also about implementing reforms. Build your institutions, strong institutions, fight corruption, do things of this kind, ensure freedom of expression, freedom of speech, the judiciary must be functioning, the legal system must be stable. It's not enough to privatize or just to change the economic system. It must be accompanied by other factors. And this is our advice to our Ukrainian friends. Do it properly, let the war stop, and we hope it will, and then everyone will concentrate on building the prosperity inside its own country.
Let's bring Daniel Weissman into this.
What you said earlier that on your talk this morning that Poland and the UK have an important role in diplomatic negotiations with Russia. Cameron was criticized for not being in Minsk for the negotiations. Is that a sign that, again, those Eurozone countries do it on like Russia, Germany, France?
No, not really. We have different formats of negotiation. We don't think that everyone should be present everywhere. We agreed to the role of Germany and France in this. Both leaders of those countries have an influence on what is going on. We think that this is a good way to do things. We are informed regularly. I believe your Prime Minister, my Prime Minister are informed regularly. Before the negotiations, after the negotiations, there are telephone calls. There is a lot of secret or quiet diplomacy that we do not know. So I think it would be unfair to criticize any political leader of Poland or of the UK that we are not present. I mean, the same can be said anywhere. I mean, why don't we have the Spanish Prime Minister, the Portuguese Prime Minister? We cannot just be everywhere. There is a certain mission that we agree to. We count on the unity of the European Union on this. And so far, even with some changes of government in Europe, we have had this unity. We are informed, we influence those negotiations. I think this is done the right way, like we had in the past the crisis in Georgia. So Sarkozy, for example, went to Moscow and he negotiated on behalf of the presidency, on behalf of the European Union. But we can have different configurations. So it's really, I cannot see anything wrong in this. We are present all the time, but the Normandy format is effective, and we hope that we'll have a proper ceasefire. And I know that Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande have been doing their best to achieve peace in Ukraine.
Okay, let's go for one last question here from any member of the panel. If we could keep it fairly brief, the answer, because we're going to sort of wrap up soon. We're getting very close to time. Is there anything that any of the panel would like to add?
Just
Holly.
on a local level, Russian planes were spotted off the coast of southern England, almost near Dorset. What is your response to these frankly intimidating Russian actions?
Our response is respect the international law, more or less. I mentioned Crimea in my lecture because you can do it properly, like you did in the case of the Scottish referendum. It was done within the constitutional process as an agreement between the Prime Minister of the UK and the First Minister of Scotland. Everything was done properly, agreed, even the question, the date. We had observers, the votes were counted, etc. If we do it properly in future, when we have peace, if you respect the international law, if you abide by the rules, everything can be done. I mean, the will of the people can be respected, but if it is not done properly, then we have problems. So, and my advice would be respect the international law.
Okay, I think that's just about all we've got time for. I'd like to say a very big thank you to our guest here, the Polish ambassador, and also a big thank you to our panel, our student panel, who have also taken part, and Dr. Kevin Maloney, research fellow from Bournemouth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. Goodbye.
Goodbye.